I almost feel bad for inviting her, Karen said with a fake pout, looking at her husband Mark. Seeing our little baby on his first Christmas, it's just going to remind Caitlin of everything she can't have. Mark wrapped his arm around her, a cruel smirk on his face as he looked out at his guests. Nonsense. This is exactly what she needs to see. They were poised, ready to deliver the final blow to the woman he had called empty and incomplete. What they didn't know was that the sound of a roaring engine pulling into their driveway isn't just another guest, it was Caitlin, and she was about to turn their night of cruel entertainment into her ultimate victory lap. But before we see how Caitlin makes them pay, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel, and let's get into the full story. She needs to see what she couldn't give me, Mark Johnson said, swirling the amber whiskey in his crystal glass. It's the perfect Christmas gift, showing her exactly what she's missing. The December sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the three-story Beacon Hill mansion, illuminating the polished hardwood floors. Mark Johnson stood in his home office, 38 years old and looking every bit the successful investment banker in his tailored suit. His dirty blonde hair showed hints of gray at the temples that he carefully concealed with monthly salon visits. Karen Johnson glanced up from the stack of invitations she was addressing at the antique desk. At 32, the former model maintained her slender figure through strict dieting and daily exercise. Her platinum blonde hair fell in perfect waves around her shoulders. "Are you sure inviting your ex-wife is a good idea?" Karen asked, her manicured fingers pausing over the cream-colored envelope. "It's been 5 years since the divorce." Mark walked to the window, looking out at the pristine view of Boston's most exclusive neighborhood. "Absolutely. Caitlin should see what a real family looks like. What she couldn't provide." His lips curled into a cold smile. "Everyone who matters in Boston will be there to witness it." Karen nodded slowly, warming to the idea. She had always felt threatened by the ghost of Mark's first wife. "You're right. She should see what a successful woman looks like. Someone who could actually give you a child." She picked up the special invitation she'd set aside. "I'll make sure she's seated where everyone can see her reaction when we bring Ethan down." In the nursery upstairs, their 1-year-old son Ethan slept peacefully, unaware of his role in his parents' calculated social display. The next morning, Mark's alarm buzzed at 5:30. He immediately reached for his phone, checking the stock market futures before his feet even touched the floor. Numbers scrolled across his screen as he made mental calculations of potential profits. "Any changes?" Karen murmured from her side of the king-sized bed. "Asian markets are up. I need to call the office before the morning meeting." Mark was already heading to the shower, not waiting for her response. By 7:15, Mark sat in the back of his town car as his driver navigated through Boston's morning traffic toward the gleaming tower housing Boston Capital Partners. "James Wilson called twice already, sir," his assistant said through the car's speaker system. "He says it's about the Hansen account." "Tell him I'll be in my office by 7:45, Mark replied, scrolling through emails, "and have coffee waiting." At the office, Mark strode through the glass doors of Boston Capital Partners, nodding curtly to employees who scrambled to look busy as he passed. His corner office overlooked Boston Harbor, a view he'd earned through years of ruthless deal-making. James Wilson was waiting, looking nervous in an ill-fitting suit. At 42, James had worked with Mark for nearly a decade, always playing second fiddle to Mark's star performance. "The Hansens are threatening to pull their $8 million portfolio," James said without preamble. "They didn't like the risk assessment on the new fund." Mark didn't look up from his computer. "Tell them if they pull out now, they lose access to the IPO next month. They'll miss a 20% gain minimum." They seemed pretty determined. "Then remind them I handled the Miller fortune when they doubled their net worth in 3 years." Mark finally looked up. "Fear and greed, James. They're afraid now, but hint at the Miller gains and greed will win. It always does." James nodded, making notes. "By the way, Karen called. Something about approving the party caterer today." Mark waved dismissively. "Whatever she wants, just make sure you and Rebecca clear your schedule for Christmas Eve. This party is important." "Wouldn't miss it," James replied, "though I was surprised to hear you invited Caitlin." Rebecca wasn't sure that was wise. Mark leaned back in his leather chair, a smile spreading across his face. "Trust me, it's going to be the highlight of the evening. Caitlin Reynolds, sitting alone at our table, watching everyone coo over my son, the family she couldn't give me." James shifted uncomfortably. "That's a bit harsh, isn't it? The fertility issues weren't really her." "She had 5 years to figure it out," Mark cut him off. "I gave her plenty of time. Now Karen's given me a son in less than 2 years of marriage." He turned back to his computer. "That's all, James. Close the door on your way out." That evening, Mark returned home to find Karen directing a small army of decorators who were transforming their already elegant home into a winter wonderland. Garlands wrapped with tiny white lights draped across banisters, and workers were setting up a 12-foot Christmas tree in the main living room. "The Simmons confirmed, and so did the Morgans," Karen said, kissing Mark's cheek as he entered. "That's 3 bank presidents, 2 hospital directors, and the mayor's chief of staff all coming." "Perfect," Mark said, loosening his tie and pouring himself a drink from the bar cart. "Did you address Caitlin's invitation?" Karen nodded, leading him to the dining room where a single envelope sat in the center of the table. "I thought you might want to add a personal note." Mark picked up the gold pen Karen had left beside the envelope. After a moment's thought, he wrote, "Thought you might like to join us for the holidays. It's time you met Ethan." Karen read over his shoulder and smiled. "That's perfect." From upstairs came the sound of Ethan crying. Karen sighed. "That's the 3rd time he's woken up today. The nanny says he might be teething." Mark barely registered her words as he sealed the envelope. "Have her give him something for it. Make sure he's in a good mood for the party. We're paying her enough." "I thought maybe you'd want to go up and check on him," Karen said carefully. "I have calls to make before dinner," Mark replied, already walking toward his office. "The European markets will be opening soon." Karen watched him go, a flicker of disappointment crossing her face before she composed herself and turned back to the decorators. "The garland needs more lights on the left side," she instructed, her voice crisp and professional once more. 3 days later, Karen stood at their mailbox, the special invitation to Caitlin in her hand. For a moment she hesitated, thinking about the woman who had once lived the life she now claimed. She'd seen pictures of Caitlin, pretty in an understated way, with auburn hair and green eyes. Mark rarely mentioned her, except to reference her failure as a wife. Karen pushed aside her momentary doubt. This party would finally establish her place in Boston society. Everyone would see her perfect home, her perfect husband, and their perfect son. Caitlin Reynolds would fade into the background, a cautionary tale of a woman who couldn't keep her man. She placed the invitation in the mailbox and raised the flag. "Mrs. Johnson?" The nanny called from the doorway. "Ethan is running a fever again." "I'll be right there," Karen replied, glancing back at the mailbox one last time before turning toward the house. Inside his home office, Mark finalized a deal that would add another $1 million to their net worth, unaware that the invitation now making its way to his ex-wife would set in motion events that would destroy everything he valued. The perfect life he had so carefully constructed was about to crumble, not through any dramatic confrontation, but through the simple power of truth finally coming to light. The mail carrier's steps echoed down the hallway of the modest apartment building on the outskirts of Boston. Inside apartment 304, Caitlin Reynolds typed rapidly on her laptop while occasionally glancing at her 4 sons playing with building blocks on the living room carpet. The boys, identical with auburn hair and green eyes, worked together to build a tower that reached nearly 2 feet high. "Careful with that, Matthew," Caitlin called out as one of the boys placed a block precariously on top. "Remember what happened yesterday." The sound of mail sliding through the slot on her front door caught Caitlin's attention. She saved the quarterly report she was reviewing and stood up from her small desk in the corner of the living room. "Keep building, boys. Mommy will be right back." Caitlin gathered the envelopes from the floor. Bills, holiday cards from friends, and a thick cream-colored envelope that stood out from the others. Her stomach tightened when she recognized the return address in Beacon Hill. The handwriting was unmistakable. Karen Johnson, Mark's new wife. "Ms. Caitlin, do you want me to start lunch for the boys?" Lucia Gonzalez called from the kitchen. The 52-year-old nanny had been with Caitlin since the Quadruplets were born 3 years ago. "Yes, please," Caitlin answered, her voice sounding distant even to herself as she stared at the envelope. She walked to the kitchen and sat at the small wooden table, turning the envelope over in her hands several times before finally opening it. The invitation was printed on expensive paper with gold lettering. "Mark and Karen Johnson request the pleasure of your company at their annual Christmas Eve celebration." A handwritten note at the bottom made her hands tremble. "Thought you might like to join us for the holidays. It's time you met Ethan." Lucia looked over from where she was cutting sandwiches into small triangles. "Bad news?" "An invitation," Caitlin said, placing it on the table, "from Mark and his wife, for Christmas Eve." Lucia frowned. "Your ex-husband? The one who—" "Yes," Caitlin interrupted. "That one." The words from their final fight 5 years ago echoed in her mind as clearly as if Mark were standing in front of her again. "It's not my fault you're broken," he had said, his blue eyes cold as he packed his suitcase. Those words had followed her through countless sleepless nights. "Are you okay?" Lucia asked, placing a gentle hand on Caitlin's shoulder. Caitlin took a deep breath. "I'm calling Sarah." 20 minutes later, after getting the boys settled with lunch, Caitlin sat on her small balcony with her phone. Dr. Sarah Chen answered on the second ring. "I was just thinking about you," Sarah said warmly. "How are the boys?" "They're good. Growing too fast," Caitlin replied. "But that's not why I'm calling. I got an invitation today, from Mark." The line went quiet for a moment. "Mark Johnson, your ex-husband? He's inviting me to their Christmas party, to meet their son." Sarah's voice hardened. "The nerve of that man, after what he did to you." Caitlin closed her eyes, remembering the day 3.5 years ago when Sarah had first become more than just her neighbor. She had found Caitlin crying in the stairwell of their apartment building. "I just saw the fertility specialist again," Caitlin had sobbed. "They still can't find any reason why I can't conceive." Sarah, who Caitlin barely knew then except as the friendly doctor from apartment 312, had sat beside her. "I'm a fertility specialist at Massachusetts General. Would you let me look at your results? Sometimes a fresh perspective helps, if..." That conversation had changed everything. 2 weeks later, Sarah sat across from Caitlin at the same kitchen table where Caitlin now held Mark's invitation. "I reviewed all your tests," Sarah had explained. "There's nothing wrong with you, Caitlin. Nothing at all. Did your husband ever get tested?" "Mark said he did. He said the doctor told him he was fine, that I was the problem." Sarah's expression had been a mixture of anger and compassion. "I think you should ask to see those results." It took Caitlin 3 more days to work up the courage to contact Mark's doctor. What she discovered shattered the narrative she'd believed for years. Mark was the one with fertility issues, not her. He had lied, letting her shoulder the blame and shame while their friends slowly abandoned her, believing his story that she was defective. Now, on the phone, Sarah's voice brought Caitlin back to the present. "You're not going to that party, are you?" "I don't know," Caitlin admitted. "Part of me wants to throw this invitation in the trash. But another part—" A crash from the living room interrupted her thoughts, followed by crying. Caitlin rushed inside to find little Mark sitting beside the toppled block tower, tears streaming down his face while his brothers tried to comfort him. "It fell on his foot," Luke explained, his green eyes wide with concern. Caitlin knelt beside her son, examining his small foot. "It's okay, sweetie. No serious damage. Should we rebuild it together?" Little Mark nodded, wiping his eyes. As Caitlin helped her sons rebuild their tower, her mind drifted to the man her son was named after, not out of respect, but as a constant reminder to herself that she had survived his cruelty and built something beautiful from the ashes. Later that evening, after the boys were asleep, Caitlin sat with Lucia in the living room, the invitation lying on the coffee table between them. "Why would he invite me now?" Caitlin asked. "It's been 5 years. To show off," Lucia said simply. "Men like him need to win. He wants to see you alone and miserable while he shows off his perfect new family." Caitlin laughed without humor. "That's exactly what he expects. He has no idea about the boys or my job." After hitting rock bottom following the divorce, Caitlin had reconnected with David Thompson, her college mentor. He had offered her a position at his struggling tech company, Atlantic Technologies. "I don't need your pity," Caitlin had told him initially. "This isn't pity," David had responded. "This is me recognizing talent. The company needs someone with your vision." While pregnant with the quadruplets, the result of successful IVF treatment using a donor, Caitlin had revitalized the company's marketing strategy. When David suffered a heart attack 6 months later, the board unexpectedly named Caitlin interim CEO. By the time her 4 boys were born, she had secured the position permanently and turned the company into a rising star in the Boston tech scene. "No one from our old circle knows about any of it," Caitlin said, picking up the invitation again. "Mark has probably been telling everyone how empty my life is without him." Lucia studied Caitlin's face. "So maybe you should go." "What? You can't be serious?" "I am. Sometimes the best response to cruelty is simply showing your truth," Lucia said. "Those boys deserve to know their worth isn't determined by a man who couldn't see yours." Caitlin looked at the family photos on her wall. 4 identical boys with her green eyes and auburn hair, their faces bright with joy. Then she looked at the invitation with its gold lettering and calculated cruelty. "It would certainly surprise him," Caitlin said slowly, "walking in with 4 3-year-olds. "The look on his face alone would be worth dressing up," Lucia smiled. Caitlin picked up her phone and scrolled to a news article from the Boston Business Journal. Atlantic Technologies posts record growth under CEO Caitlin Reynolds. "He always said I'd be nothing without him," Caitlin said quietly. "But look what I built while he was busy creating his perfect image." Lucia reached over and squeezed Caitlin's hand. "So show him. Show everyone who believed his lies." Caitlin set down her phone and picked up the invitation again. The thought of walking into Mark's mansion made her stomach knot with anxiety. But something stronger was emerging: determination. Maybe it was time to reclaim her story, not for revenge, but for truth. She thought of her sons sleeping down the hall, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the example she wanted to set for them about courage and integrity. "I'll need to find a dress," Caitlin said finally. "Something memorable." Lucia smiled. "I know just the color. Red, like a cardinal in winter, impossible to ignore." As Caitlin prepared for bed that night, she placed the invitation on her nightstand rather than in the trash. The thought of facing Mark after 5 years still made her heart race. But for the first time, it wasn't fear she felt. It was something much more powerful, the strength that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you've overcome. The morning sunlight streamed through the blinds as Caitlin stood in front of her closet, pushing hangers aside one by one. She hadn't attended a formal event since before the quadruplets were born. Nothing she owned would be suitable for Mark and Karen's Christmas Eve party. "Mom, can we have pancakes?" Matthew called from the doorway, his 3 brothers crowding behind him. Caitlin turned to her sons with a smile. "Of course. Let's get breakfast started before Lucia arrives." In the kitchen, Caitlin mixed pancake batter while her 4 identical boys sat at the table, carefully placing forks and napkins. "Mom, "Why were you looking at your old clothes?" Luke asked. Caitlin poured batter onto the hot griddle. "We're going to a special Christmas party next week. I need to find a nice dress." "Will there be other kids?" John asked, his green eyes wide with excitement. "There might be one little boy," Caitlin answered carefully. "His name is Ethan." The front door opened as Lucia arrived, bringing the cold December air with her. "Good morning, everyone. Pancakes smell wonderful." After breakfast, with the boys settled in the living room with Lucia, Caitlin prepared for work. As CEO of Atlantic Technologies, she couldn't afford to be distracted, especially today with the board meeting to finalize their expansion plans. 30 minutes later, Caitlin walked through the glass doors of Atlantic Technologies' current headquarters. The receptionist smiled brightly. "Good morning, Miss Reynolds. The board members are already gathering in the conference room." "Thank you, Diane." "Datu, could you ask Jenny to bring in the final projection reports?" Caitlin had barely settled at her desk when Jenny Thompson appeared. At 24, she was the image of her father, David, with the same determined expression and quick mind. "Here are the reports, and congratulations in advance," Jenny said. "Dad would be so proud of what you've accomplished." Caitlin smiled at the mention of her mentor. David's heart attack 3 years ago had been devastating, but his recovery was progressing well. "How is he doing?" "Much better. He's actually asking to see the quarterly numbers." "Tell him I'll bring them myself this weekend," Caitlin replied, gathering her materials for the meeting. As they walked toward the conference room, Jenny lowered her voice. "I heard you got an invitation to your ex-husband's Christmas party. Are you really going?" Caitlin paused. News travels fast. "Dad mentioned it when I visited yesterday. He's worried. I've decided to go," Caitlin said firmly. "Not for Mark, but for myself. And for the boys." Jenny's eyes widened. "You're bringing the quadruplets?" "Oh, I would pay to see his face when you walk in with 4 toddlers." Caitlin laughed. "It's not about revenge. It's about truth. The boys should see that I'm not afraid of difficult situations." In the conference room, 10 board members waited. For the next 2 hours, Caitlin presented Atlantic Technologies' expansion plans, including opening a new headquarters downtown with a dedicated childcare facility for employees. "With this acquisition of TechServe, we'll increase our market share by 18%, Caitlin explained, pointing to the projection screen. "Their client base complements ours perfectly, and their development team fills our current gaps." By the meeting's end, approval was unanimous. The board chair, Eleanor Reed, approached Caitlin afterward. "Remarkable work, Caitlin. 3 years ago, this company was struggling to stay afloat. Now we're expanding. The Boston Business Journal wants to feature you in their Women in Tech issue next month." "Thank you, Eleanor. It's been a team effort." Eleanor smiled knowingly. "Speaking of Boston's business community, I heard Mark Johnson will be at the Chamber of Commerce dinner next month. Will that be awkward?" Caitlin maintained her professional smile. "Not at all. In fact, I'll be seeing him sooner. He invited me to his Christmas party." Eleanor's eyebrows shot up. "Really? That's unexpected." "Yes," Caitlin agreed. "I believe he's expecting to see me arrive alone and miserable. He'll be quite surprised." Later that afternoon, Caitlin stood in an upscale boutique in downtown Boston, examining a red dress on the rack. "This would look perfect with your coloring," the sales associate said. "Would you like to try it on?" In the dressing room, Caitlin slipped into the dress. The rich red fabric complemented her auburn hair and the cut flattered her figure. As she turned before the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Gone was the insecure woman who had believed Mark's lies. In her place stood the CEO of a growing company and mother of 4 amazing boys. "I'll take it," she told the associate. That evening, Caitlin sat with her sons in their living room, trying to explain in simple terms what the Christmas party would be like. "There will be many people there," she said. "Some of them knew Mommy a long time ago." Little Mark looked up from his toy car. "Will the man I'm named after be there?" Caitlin took a deep breath. This was the most difficult part. She had named her second-born son after her ex-husband not out of respect, but as a reminder of her own strength. "Yes, he will. His name is Mark Johnson. He and Mommy were married before, but we aren't anymore." "Is he our daddy?" Matthew asked innocently. "No, sweetie. You don't have a daddy like some kids do, but you have me and Lucia and each other. Our family is special just the way it is." The boys seemed to accept this explanation and returned to their toys. From the kitchen doorway, Lucia watched with approval. "You handled that perfectly," she said when the boys were distracted. "I hope so," Caitlin replied. "I want to be honest with them without making it complicated." "Are you sure taking them to this party is the right decision?" Lucia asked. "We could find a sitter." "You could go alone." Caitlin shook her head. "They're part of who I am now. Hiding them would feel like I'm ashamed, and I'm not. Besides, they should learn early that we face difficult situations with honesty." "Then I'm coming too," Lucia stated firmly. "Those boys need a familiar face if things get uncomfortable." "I was hoping you'd say that," Caitlin admitted. "I already bought you a new dress. It's in that shopping bag." Lucia peeked in the bag and pulled out an elegant navy dress. "It's beautiful. But you shouldn't have—" "Please, it's the least I can do. You're part of our family, Lucia." Later that night, after the boys were asleep, Caitlin sat at her desk practicing potential responses to difficult questions. She knew people would ask about her single status, her decision to have quadruplets, maybe even make comments about Mark's new family. "Yes, I used a sperm donor," she practiced saying calmly. "It was the right choice for me." Atlantic Technologies has grown substantially in the last 3 years. Thank you for asking about my work. Mark and I wanted different things. I'm happy he's found what he was looking for. The words felt hollow in her empty living room. Would she maintain this composure when facing Mark and his friends? Would she falter when seeing the son he had with Karen, the family he claimed he always wanted? Caitlin's phone buzzed with a text from Jenny. "Dad says to remember who you are now, not who you were then." She smiled at David's wisdom. He had believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. When the board had suggested naming her CEO, David had been her strongest advocate despite his health struggles. "You rebuilt yourself," he had told her. "Now rebuild my company." Caitlin sent a quick reply to Jenny. "Tell him I remember every day, and I'm bringing the boys to the party." Jenny's response came immediately. "He says Mark Johnson won't know what hit him." Across town in Beacon Hill, Mark and Karen Johnson were having their third argument of the week about the party preparations. "The caterer called again," Karen said, following Mark into his home office. "They need final approval on the menu." Mark didn't look up from his computer. "Whatever you think is best." "That's what you said yesterday, and then you complained about my choices." Karen's voice rose in frustration. "You're more concerned about Caitlin coming than anything else." Mark finally looked at his wife. "This party is important for my business." "Everything needs to be perfect." "Perfect for impressing your ex-wife," Karen said coldly. "Sometimes I wonder if you ever really got over her." The next morning, Caitlin sat her 4 sons down for a more detailed talk about the upcoming party. They sat in a row on the couch, their identical faces serious as they listened. "Sometimes we have to see people who weren't nice to us," she explained, "but we can still be polite and show them that we're happy with our lives." "Even if they were mean?" John asked. "Especially then," Caitlin answered. "Being kind when others aren't shows real strength." As the boys practiced saying Merry Christmas in unison, Caitlin felt a new sense of determination. She had spent 5 years rebuilding her life after Mark shattered it with his lies. Now she would walk into his house not as a victim, but as a woman who had created something meaningful and true, a successful career and a family full of love. With the quadruplets now practiced and ready for their special Christmas greeting, Caitlin sent them off with Lucia to get dressed for the day. She glanced at her calendar. Only 4 days remained until Mark's Christmas Eve party. The thought still made her stomach tighten, but her determination grew stronger each day. Across Boston in Beacon Hill, the Johnson mansion buzzed with activity. Workers hung crystal icicles from the 12-foot tree in the main living room while Karen directed every detail. "The silver ornaments need to be more evenly spaced," she instructed a decorator balanced on a ladder, "and add more of the pearl garlands toward the top." The doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of the caterer for their final tasting. Karen checked her watch and frowned. Mark had promised to be home by noon for this appointment. "Mrs. Johnson?" The nanny appeared at the doorway, holding 1-year-old Ethan. "I think he has a fever again." Karen touched her son's forehead. "He does feel warm. Did you give him the medicine the doctor prescribed?" "Yes, but it hasn't helped much, and he's not eating well." Karen sighed. "Put him down for a nap. I'll check on him after I meet with the caterer." The front door opened, and Karen turned, expecting Mark. Instead, it was just another delivery of poinsettias for the entryway. "Mrs. Johnson?" The caterer called from the kitchen. "We need your approval on the menu." "Coming," Karen called back, glancing at her phone. No messages from Mark. In the kitchen, the caterer had arranged sample dishes across the marble island. "We've prepared the options you requested," the caterer explained. "The beef tenderloin with truffle sauce, the salmon with dill, and—" Karen's phone rang. "Excuse me," she said, relieved to see Mark's name on the screen. "Mark, where are you?" "The caterer is here." "I can't make it," Mark replied, sounds of his office in the background. "The Hansen account is still causing problems. Just decide whatever you think is best." "That's what you said about the decorations. And then you complained they were too simple," Karen snapped. "This is your party too. Karen, I'm trusting you with this. I'll be home for dinner." After he hung up, Karen turned back to the confused caterer with a forced smile. "My husband won't be joining us." Let's continue. At Atlantic Technologies, Caitlin sat in her office reviewing final reports before the holiday break when her assistant rushed in without knocking. "Ms. Reynolds, we have a problem. West Coast Distributors is threatening to pull out of our new software integration." Caitlin set down her pen. "What happened?" "Their chief information officer says our system caused data loss during testing. They want to cancel the entire $2 million contract." "Call an emergency meeting with the technical team," Caitlin said, standing up, "and get Jake Hudson on the phone. I want to speak to him directly." 20 minutes later, Caitlin sat at the head of the conference table surrounded by her technical team, phone on speaker. "Jake, I understand your concerns," she said calmly to the West Coast CIO. "But I believe there's been a misunderstanding about where the data loss occurred." "My team says it's your integration that failed," Jake responded tersely. Caitlin nodded to her lead developer, who spoke up. "Sir, we've analyzed the logs. The issue occurred in your legacy system before our integration even began. We can demonstrate this if you give us 30 minutes. Jake went silent for a moment. "You have 30 minutes. If you can prove it wasn't your system, we'll continue. If not, we're done." After the call ended, Caitlin's team looked worried. "Can we really prove it?" Caitlin asked her developer. "Yes, the logs are clear, but explaining it to someone non-technical in 30 minutes will be challenging." Caitlin smiled. "Then let's make it simple. No technical jargon. Show them exactly where their system failed with basic language even I can understand." The team worked quickly, creating a straightforward presentation. When they called back, Jake and his technical team watched in silence as Atlantic's developers walked through the evidence. "As you can see," Caitlin concluded, "the data loss happened here, 3 minutes before our system even connected to yours." After a long pause, Jake spoke. "You're right. It was our system. Most vendors would have just blamed us without proof or tried to hide behind technical language. I appreciate the honesty." When the call ended with the contract saved, Caitlin's team broke into applause. "That's why she's CEO," someone said loudly. Jenny Thompson appeared at the door with a smile. Crisis averted? Just another day at the office, Caitlin replied, gathering her things. I need to get home early today. One of the boys has a cold. Which one? Jenny asked. Luke. He woke up with a runny nose and slight fever. Will that affect your plans for the party? Caitlin shook her head. It's still 4 days away. He should be fine by then. When Caitlin arrived home, she found Dr. Sarah Chen already there, examining Luke on the living room couch. Sarah, you didn't need to make a house call, Caitlin said, setting down her bag. Sarah smiled. What are friends for? Besides, I was worried when Lucia called about his fever. Is he okay? Just a standard winter cold, plenty of fluids, rest, and he'll be fine in a couple of days. Sarah packed her medical bag. How are you feeling about the party? Still planning to go? Caitlin sat down next to her son, stroking his hair. Yes, but I'm more nervous than I want to admit. Of course you are, Sarah said. You're walking back into the lion's den. But remember who you are now, not the woman Mark broke 5 years ago. Luke looked up at his mother with tired eyes. I can still go to the Christmas party, right, Mom? If you're feeling better? Yes, Caitlin assured him. Now rest while I talk to Dr. Chen. In the kitchen, Lucia prepared chicken soup while Sarah and Caitlin talked quietly. I knew a man like Mark once, Lucia said as she chopped vegetables. My first husband in Arizona. Everything was about appearances. When I couldn't give him the perfect social life he wanted, he found someone who could. Caitlin looked surprised. You never told me you were married before. It was 20 years ago, Lucia said. I learned a valuable lesson. Men who care that much about what others think rarely care enough about how their wives feel. Sarah nodded. That's Mark Johnson in a nutshell. Did you know he's been spreading rumors about you in Boston's social circles? A patient of mine mentioned it. She's friends with Karen's sister. What kind of rumors? Caitlin asked. That you're living alone in some small town, unable to move on. That you tried dating, but no one wanted a woman who couldn't have children. Caitlin shook her head. He has no idea what my life is actually like. Which is exactly why showing up with 4 beautiful boys will be so powerful, Lucia said, stirring the soup. Truth is always stronger than lies. Back in Beacon Hill, Karen sat alone at the dining table. It was 7:30, and Mark still wasn't home. Ethan had finally fallen asleep after crying for hours, his fever still high despite the medicine. When she heard the front door open, Karen stood up quickly. You're late, she said as Mark walked in. Dinner got cold hours ago. Mark loosened his tie. I told you I had a difficult client situation. You said you'd be home for dinner. Ethan has been sick all day, and I had to handle everything for the party myself. Mark poured himself a drink from the bar cart. Is Ethan okay? No, he's not okay. He has a fever of 102 degrees, and he's been crying for his father. Did you call the doctor? Yes, Mark, I called the doctor. He said it's probably just a virus, but someone should be monitoring him closely. Karen crossed her arms. I had to cancel my meeting with the florist to stay with him because you couldn't bother to come home. Mark took a long drink. I can't just leave work whenever he gets a sniffle. That's why we have a nanny. A sniffle? He's been sick for 3 days. Karen's voice rose. Sometimes I think you care more about making Caitlin feel bad at this party than you do about your actual son. That's ridiculous, Mark snapped. I've been working 12-hour days to pay for this house, that nanny, and this ridiculously expensive party you insisted on throwing. I insisted. This whole party was your idea, especially inviting your ex-wife to humiliate her. Mark set down his glass hard. I'm going to check on Ethan. Don't bother. He's finally asleep after crying all afternoon. Karen turned away, wiping an angry tear. The catering menu is on your desk. Since you couldn't be bothered to help choose it, you can at least approve it before tomorrow's deadline. As Mark walked to his office, his phone buzzed. It was a text from James Wilson. Heard a rumor today. Caitlin Reynolds is CEO of Atlantic Technologies now. Did you know? Mark stared at the message in disbelief. The broken woman he'd left behind was now running a growing tech company? He quickly searched online and found a recent business article featuring her photo. She looked different, confident, successful, happy. For the first time, Mark wondered if his plan to invite Caitlin might backfire. He poured another drink and sat alone in his dark office, surrounded by papers for a party that suddenly felt like a potential mistake. Mark barely slept that night, troubled by the discovery about Caitlin's success. Christmas Eve morning arrived with pale winter sunlight filtering through the mansion's windows. He stood in his bathroom, straightening his tie and practicing what he would say when Caitlin arrived. "Caitlin, what a surprise to see you alone tonight. I hope the holidays aren't too difficult for you," he rehearsed, smiling at his reflection. "Ethan is such a joy, everything I always wanted in a family." Karen appeared in the bathroom doorway, already dressed in a designer outfit for the early preparations. "Are you seriously practicing insults for your ex-wife on Christmas Eve?" Mark turned, startled. "Not insults, just conversation. I heard you. What a surprise to see you alone." "That's cruel, Mark." Karen crossed her arms. "This entire party has become about humiliating Caitlin rather than celebrating our first Christmas with Ethan." "That's not true," Mark protested, though his expression betrayed him. "It is true. You're obsessed with showing her what she missed out on." Karen stepped closer. "Did you know she's running Atlantic Technologies now?" "My friend Linda mentioned it yesterday." Mark's face tightened. "I just found out. It doesn't change anything." "It changes everything. She's not the broken woman you expected to walk through our door." Karen's voice rose. "This whole plan could blow up in our faces." The doorbell interrupted their argument. "That must be the caterers," Karen said, composing herself. "We'll continue this later." Downstairs, staff members filled the mansion, transforming it for the evening ahead. Karen directed them with forced cheerfulness, maintaining the perfect hostess facade despite her growing unease. Across town, morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Caitlin's apartment as she checked on Luke, who had been sick with a cold. "How are you feeling, sweetie?" she asked, touching his forehead. Luke smiled up at her. "All better, Mommy." "Can I wear my special Christmas clothes tonight?" Caitlin felt relief wash over her. "If you're feeling good, yes." "Are your brothers awake?" "They're helping Lucia make breakfast," Luke said. In the kitchen, Caitlin found her other 3 sons carefully setting the table while Lucia cooked pancakes shaped like Christmas trees. "Good morning," Lucia greeted her. "Someone's feeling much better today." "Perfect timing," Caitlin replied. "I was worried we might have to change our plans." After breakfast, Caitlin prepared for her final day at the office before the holiday break. "I'll be home by 3 o'clock, she promised the boys. "Then we'll all get ready for the special Christmas adventure." At Atlantic Technologies, Caitlin found her team gathered in the conference room with a cake and champagne. "What's all this?" she asked in surprise. Eleanor Reed, the board chair, stepped forward with an envelope. "We received the official announcement this morning. Atlantic Technologies has been named one of Boston's top 10 fastest-growing companies." The room erupted in applause as Eleanor continued. "When you took over as CEO 3 years ago, this company was barely staying afloat. Now we've seen 30% growth for 3 consecutive years. This recognition is because of your leadership." Caitlin accepted the envelope with genuine emotion. "This isn't just my achievement. Everyone in this room made it happen." Jenny Thompson raised her glass. "To Caitlin, who proved that the best revenge is massive success." Everyone laughed and toasted, unaware of how literal that statement would become in just a few hours. After the celebration, Caitlin called David Thompson from her office. "I heard the news," David said when he answered. "I couldn't be prouder if you were my own daughter." "I wish you could have been there," Caitlin replied. "How are you feeling?" Strong enough to give you some advice, David said. Jenny told me you're going to Mark's party tonight. Are you sure about this? I'm sure. It's time to close that chapter of my life completely. Just remember, you have nothing to prove to him or anyone else. Your success speaks for itself. Caitlin smiled. Thank you, David. I needed to hear that today. By afternoon, Karen stood in Ethan's nursery, dressing him in an expensive outfit for the party. The 1-year-old fussed as she adjusted his tiny bow tie. Please be good tonight, sweetheart, she whispered. Mommy needs everything to be perfect. Looking at her son's innocent face, Karen felt a wave of doubt. Was she just a pawn in Mark's game with his ex-wife? Had he married her simply because she could give him the child Caitlin supposedly couldn't? The sound of Mark's voice downstairs interrupted her thoughts. He was on the phone, his tone agitated. I don't care what it takes, James. I need that information about Atlantic Technologies before tonight, he was saying. Find out how successful they really are. Karen held Ethan closer. At least you're real, she whispered to her son. In Caitlin's apartment, excitement filled the air as everyone prepared for the evening. Lucia helped the quadruplets into their matching outfits, navy blue pants, white shirts, and red bow ties. You look so handsome, Lucia told them, adjusting little Mark's collar. Remember what we practiced? Merry Christmas, the 4 boys chorused together, their identical faces beaming with pride. In her bedroom, Caitlin slipped into her red dress, surprised by her own reflection. The woman in the mirror looked strong and confident, nothing like the broken person who had left Mark's world 5 years ago. Lucia appeared in the doorway to help with her hair. You look beautiful, she said, arranging Caitlin's auburn waves. I'm more nervous than I expected, Caitlin admitted. I haven't seen these people since the divorce. That's natural, Lucia replied, pinning a section of hair. But remember why you're going. Not for revenge, Caitlin said, for closure, and to show my boys that we face difficult situations with dignity. Exactly. Lucia squeezed her shoulder. Those boys are watching how you handle this. You're teaching them about strength that has nothing to do with power or money. When Caitlin emerged from her bedroom, all 4 boys gasped in delight. Mommy looks like a princess, John exclaimed. Caitlin laughed. Thank you, sweetie. Now, does everyone remember what we talked about? This party will have lots of people you don't know, and you need to be on your best behavior. And say Merry Christmas when we meet new people, Matthew added seriously. Perfect. I'm so proud of all of you. By 7 o'clock, the Johnson mansion glowed with light. Cars lined the circular driveway as Boston's elite arrived in evening wear and furs. Inside, Mark stood near the massive fireplace with Ethan in his arms, greeting important guests. The little boy served as both prop and distraction, allowing Mark to showcase his perfect family life. Senator Williams, welcome, Mark said, shaking hands with an older man. You remember my wife Karen, and this is our son Ethan. The senator smiled at the child. Handsome boy. Takes after his father. Indeed, Mark agreed. The Johnson genes are strong. James Wilson arrived with his wife Rebecca, immediately pulling Mark aside. I got that information you wanted, he said quietly. Atlantic Technologies has indeed had impressive growth. Their stock price has doubled in the past year. Mark frowned. That complicates things. There's more, James added. I heard from George Preston that Caitlin is coming tonight. He seemed surprised you invited her, given her success. Everyone already knows? Mark felt his careful plan slipping away. The business community isn't that large, Mark. Did you really think people wouldn't know she's a CEO now? Before Mark could respond, Karen appeared at his side. The Prestons just arrived. They're asking for you. As more guests arrived, filling the mansion with chatter and laughter, Mark grew increasingly tense. He kept glancing at his watch and the front door. She's late, he muttered to Karen around 8:15. Maybe she's not coming. Karen adjusted Ethan on her hip. Would that disappoint you? Before Mark could answer, they were interrupted by the doorbell. Karen handed Ethan to the nanny and smoothed her designer dress. "I'll get it," she said, moving toward the door with practiced grace. The crowd fell momentarily silent, watching as Karen opened the large oak door. Her practiced smile froze on her face as she saw who stood on the doorstep. Caitlin Reynolds stood confidently in her striking red dress, but it wasn't her appearance that caused Karen's shock. It was the 4 identical 3-year-old boys in matching outfits standing beside her, along with an elegant older woman. "Sorry we're late," Caitlin said clearly, her voice carrying through the suddenly silent room. "Boston traffic is terrible this time of year." From his position by the fireplace, Mark's face drained of color as he realized his perfect Christmas showcase was about to become something entirely different. "Everyone, meet Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John," Caitlin announced to the silent room, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Boys, say Merry Christmas." The Quadruplets, with their matching auburn hair and striking green eyes, chorused a perfect "Merry Christmas" that echoed through the stunned gathering. Karen stood frozen at the doorway, her practiced hostess smile now a rigid mask. "Caitlin, how wonderful to see you," she managed to say. "And with children." "I had no idea." "Yes, my boys are 3 years old now," Caitlin replied pleasantly. "And this is Lucia Gonzalez, who helps me raise them." Lucia nodded politely. "Your home is beautiful. The children have been excited about this Christmas adventure all day." Karen stepped back mechanically, gesturing them inside. "Please, come in." As Caitlin guided her sons into the mansion, every eye in the room followed them. The elegant party guests who had been chatting moments before now stared openly at the 4 identical boys. Near the fireplace, Mark stood paralyzed with shock. He instinctively stepped backward, nearly dropping Ethan, who began to cry at the sudden movement. The nanny quickly appeared to take the fussing child. "Is that him?" Little Mark whispered loudly to his mother, pointing at Mark Sr. "Yes," Caitlin said softly. "That's Mr. Johnson. Remember what we talked about?" Little Mark nodded seriously before turning to his brothers. "Come on," he said. "Let's go say hello properly." Before Caitlin could stop them, the 4 boys marched in perfect formation toward Mark, stopping directly in front of him. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Johnson," they said in perfect unison. "Thank you for inviting us to your party." Mark looked down at the 4 identical faces, each a perfect miniature of Caitlin with her green eyes and expressive features. He struggled to find words. Yes. "Merry Christmas," he stammered. "Thank you for coming." Senator Williams, who had been speaking with Mark earlier, broke the awkward silence. "Johnson, you didn't tell me Caitlin had children, and such handsome young men, too." "I didn't know," Mark said quietly, his eyes still fixed on the Quadruplets. Caitlin stepped forward. "Senator Williams, how nice to see you again. It's been years." "Indeed it has," the senator replied warmly. "And now you're running Atlantic Technologies, I hear, making quite a splash in the business world." "You know about that?" Caitlin asked, surprised. "Of course. Your acquisition of TechServe made all the business pages last month. Brilliant move." As the initial shock subsided, other guests began approaching Caitlin. Many were former friends who had distanced themselves after her divorce, believing Mark's narrative about her. "Caitlin, you look wonderful," said Margaret Preston, the wife of a prominent Boston surgeon. "I had no idea you had children. And 4. How extraordinary." "Life is full of surprises," Caitlin replied pleasantly. Did you remarry?" Margaret asked, glancing around as if expecting to see a husband. "No, I'm not married. I decided to have children on my own," Caitlin answered calmly. "It was the best decision I ever made." The Quadruplets stayed close to their mother, perfectly behaved but naturally drawing attention. Lucia expertly managed them, guiding them away from fragile decorations and making sure they didn't become overwhelmed by the crowd. Across the room, James Wilson made his way to Caitlin. Ms. Reynolds, I don't know if you remember me, James Wilson. I work with Mark at Boston Capital Partners. Of course I remember you, James. How is Rebecca? She's well, thank you. She's here somewhere. James cleared his throat. I wanted to congratulate you on Atlantic Technology's success. 30% growth in 3 years is remarkable. Caitlin smiled. Thank you. We have an excellent team. Would you consider advising on one of our tech investment portfolios? We could use someone with your expertise. Mark, who had moved to the bar for a strong drink, overheard this exchange with growing discomfort. His plan to showcase Caitlin as a lonely, childless failure was disintegrating before his eyes. Karen attempted to maintain her hostess duties, directing servers and greeting guests, but her attention kept returning to Caitlin and the Quadruplets. The boys were now charming a group of Mark's clients who seemed delighted by their polite manners and identical appearance. They're absolutely adorable, Karen overheard one woman say, and so well-behaved for 3-year-olds. Caitlin must be an amazing mother. And a CEO too, another added. I can barely manage one child and a part-time job. Karen looked down at her own trembling hands. Her perfectly planned party had been hijacked. Guests who were supposed to be admiring her home, her husband, and her son were now flocking around her husband's ex-wife. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived 20 minutes later, embracing Caitlin warmly. Sorry, I'm late. Hospital emergency. Sarah, I'm so glad you made it, Caitlin said. You know most of these people, I think. Indeed I do, Sarah replied, scanning the room. Many of them are my patients. This simple statement caused several nearby women to look uncomfortable, as Dr. Chen was one of Boston's top fertility specialists. As servers began circulating with champagne, Caitlin accepted a glass. The nervous tension she had felt on the doorstep had faded. She moved through the crowd with confidence, neither seeking out Mark nor avoiding him. Little Mark tugged at her dress. Mom, can we see the Christmas tree? It's so big. Of course, sweetie. Let's all go look. The 4 boys followed their mother to the massive tree, exclaiming in delight at the twinkling lights and ornaments. Nearby, guests watched with smiles as Caitlin pointed out different decorations to her sons. She seems so happy, Rebecca Wilson whispered to her husband. Remember how devastated she was after the divorce? Yes, James replied. Mark told everyone she was broken beyond repair. Clearly, he was wrong. This conversation, like many others happening around the room, reached Mark's ears as he tried unsuccessfully to regain control of his party. He had positioned himself near the drinks table, accepting congratulations on his beautiful home while watching Caitlin from across the room. Karen appeared at his side, her smile tight. People are asking about the Quadruplets, she said quietly. They want to know if you knew Caitlin had 4 children. What are you telling them? Mark asked. Nothing, because I don't know anything, Karen hissed. Did you know? Of course not, Mark said, draining his glass. She must have used a donor. One of them is named Mark, Karen pointed out. After you? Mark had no answer for that. The most unexpected moment came when Mark's mother arrived. The elegant older woman entered the party late, immediately spotting her son near the bar. Mark, darling, sorry I'm delayed. Traffic was terrible, she said, kissing his cheek. Mother, I'm glad you made it, Mark said stiffly. Mrs. Johnson looked around the room, her gaze stopping abruptly on Caitlin and the 4 boys. Is that Caitlin? With children? Yes, Mark confirmed grimly. Without another word to her son, Mrs. Johnson crossed the room directly to Caitlin. The 2 women had always gotten along well, even after the divorce. Caitlin, my dear, Mrs. Johnson said warmly, you look wonderful. Thank you, Eleanor, Caitlin replied, genuinely pleased to see her former mother-in-law. I'd like you to meet my sons. The boys lined up and greeted her politely. When little Mark introduced himself, Eleanor's eyebrows rose. You named him Mark, she asked quietly. Yes, Caitlin said simply. These are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Understanding dawned in Eleanor's eyes. The Gospel writers. How lovely! She knelt to little Mark's level. I'm very pleased to meet you, young man. As dinner time approached, servers began directing guests toward the dining room. Karen had spent weeks planning the seating arrangement, placing Caitlin at a table far from the center of attention. Now, several important guests were requesting to sit near her, disrupting the entire plan. We'll need to adjust the seating, Karen told the head server frantically. Put Miss Reynolds and her party at table 3. Table 3 was directly across from the head table where Mark and Karen would be seated, not where Karen had originally planned to place Caitlin, but now she wanted to keep an eye on her husband's reactions. Throughout it all, Mark and Caitlin still hadn't spoken directly to each other. Their eyes had met briefly across the room several times, but both had quickly looked away. The inevitable confrontation loomed, but for now the power dynamic had clearly shifted. As Caitlin guided her sons toward the dining room, she caught Mark staring at her from the bar. For the first time since entering the mansion, she allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. Not because she had disrupted his perfect party, but because she had finally reclaimed her own truth. The evening had barely begun, and already the carefully constructed narrative Mark had built about their past was crumbling. Guests who had once pitied Caitlin now admired her. People who had believed she was broken now saw her strength. And Mark, who had expected to showcase his perfect new family, found himself instead watching his ex-wife shine. The elegantly set dining tables gleamed under the crystal chandeliers as servers guided guests to their assigned seats. Caitlin found herself and her sons placed at table 3, directly across from Mark and Karen at the head table. Not a coincidence, she was sure. Do you need help with the boys? Lucia asked quietly as they arranged the children in their seats. We'll manage, Caitlin replied, though I didn't expect to be so visible. Around them, Boston's elite settled into their chairs, many still casting curious glances at the quadruplets. At the head table, Mark leaned close to Karen, whispering something that made her face tighten. She nodded stiffly before turning to speak to the mayor's wife beside her. George Preston, a heart surgeon who had once been in Mark and Caitlin's social circle, approached their table with his wife Margaret. Caitlin, may we join you? He asked. It's been too long. Of course, Caitlin replied, surprised. The Prestons had been among the first to distance themselves after her divorce. As they sat down, Margaret leaned forward. I owe you an apology, Caitlin. We believed what Mark told us about your situation. That's in the past, Caitlin said graciously. How have you been? While the adults talked, the quadruplets sat perfectly behaved, using the proper forks as Lucia had taught them. Their good manners drew admiring comments from nearby tables. They're so well behaved, Margaret commented. How do you manage 4 3-year-olds and run a company? With help, Caitlin said, smiling at Lucia. And a lot of organization. George lowered his voice. I hear Atlantic Technologies is acquiring Coleman Software next month. That's quite a move. News travels fast, Caitlin replied. We haven't announced that yet. The business community is small, George said, and people talk, especially about success stories like yours. From the head table, Mark watched this conversation with growing unease. James Wilson sat down beside him, following his gaze. She's quite impressive, James commented. The boys, too. She used a donor, Mark said curtly. She must have. James raised an eyebrow. Does it matter? She's clearly doing well. It matters, Mark insisted, his knuckles white around his water glass. Across the room, Karen was trying unsuccessfully to draw attention to Ethan, who sat in a high chair beside her. Ethan just said his first full sentence yesterday, she told the mayor's wife. He's very advanced for his age. Boom, but the woman was distracted, watching the quadruplets at table 3. I'm sorry, what were you saying? Those 4 little boys are just fascinating. Identical quadruplets are so rare. Karen's smile stiffened. Yes, quite unusual. The first course was served, momentarily diverting attention. Caitlin helped her sons with their small portions of soup, quietly reminding them about table manners. Little Mark, the most outgoing of the four, looked around the room with curious eyes. "Mom," he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "is that man still looking at us?" Caitlin followed his gaze to Mark, who quickly looked away. "Yes, sweetie. Many people are looking because they're not used to seeing four identical boys." "But he keeps looking the most," Luke observed. "Is it because I'm named after him?" "You're named Mark, not Luke," Matthew corrected his brother. "I meant Mark is named after him," Luke explained patiently. Guests at nearby tables pretended not to listen while catching every word. Caitlin maintained her composure. "Yes, that's Mr. Johnson," she said simply. "The man I told you about." Little Mark's face brightened with understanding. "Can I go talk to him? I want to ask if he likes being called Mark too." Before Caitlin could stop him, little Mark slipped from his chair and marched directly to the head table. The room fell silent as the 3-year-old approached Mark Sr. "Hello," the boy said confidently. "I'm Mark too. My mom says I'm named after you. Do you like being called Mark?" "I do." Mark Sr. looked down at the child, momentarily speechless. Karen's face had gone pale. Yes, I like my name," Mark finally managed. "Do you know my brothers?" Little Mark continued. "Matthew, Luke, and John. Mom says we're named after important story people." Lucia appeared swiftly behind the boy. "Mark, honey, let's go back to our table. Mr. Johnson is trying to eat his dinner." "Okay, Merry Christmas!" Little Mark waved before taking Lucia's hand. As they walked away, Mark Sr. drained his wine glass in one gulp. The encounter had drawn every eye in the room, including his mother's. Eleanor Johnson watched the scene with intense interest from her table. During the main course, Dr. Sarah Chen circulated through the room, stopping to greet former patients. Her presence created visible discomfort among several women who recognized her as their fertility specialist. "Dr. Chen treated me last year," whispered one woman to her friend. "She's the reason we have our daughter." "She helped the Williamsons too," replied another, "and the Gardners. Actually, quite a few people in this room." These conversations inevitably led to discussions about fertility treatments, causing Mark to shift uncomfortably in his seat as fragments reached him. Advances in male infertility treatment. Sometimes, the husband's issues can be overcome. Important to test both partners. Karen caught these snippets too. She glanced at Mark with growing suspicion, remembering how he had rushed their fertility treatments, insisting that the doctors focus on her rather than testing him thoroughly. After the main course, Karen excused herself and made her way to Caitlin's table. The two women had not spoken directly since Caitlin's arrival. "Caitlin, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Karen asked, her voice tense but polite. Caitlin nodded, surprised. "Of course." They walked to a quiet corner near the kitchen, away from curious eyes. "Your boys are lovely," Karen began awkwardly. "I had no idea you had children." "Thank you," Caitlin replied. "Ethan is beautiful too." Karen looked directly at Caitlin. Did you use treatments to have them?" Understanding dawned on Caitlin's face. "Yes, IVF with a donor." Because of your condition?" Karen pressed, her voice barely above a whisper. Caitlin hesitated. This was the moment she could reveal Mark's lie, but looking at Karen's tense face, she felt unexpected sympathy. "Karen, I never had a fertility condition," she said gently. "The problems in my marriage to Mark were more complicated than that." Karen's eyes widened. "What are you saying?" Before Caitlin could answer, servers entered with dessert trolleys, forcing them to return to their tables. Karen walked back to her seat slowly, her mind racing with questions. Eleanor Johnson chose this moment to visit Caitlin's table. The elegant older woman bent down to speak to the Quadruplets, who charmed her with their polite responses. "They're wonderful, Caitlin," Eleanor said warmly. "I wish you had told me about them sooner. I would have loved to know these special boys." The unspoken word hung in the air. Grandchildren. Though not biologically related to Mark, in another reality, these children would have been Eleanor's grandchildren. "They know all about you," Caitlin said. "I've shown them pictures of the garden party at your home in Connecticut." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I'd love to have them visit sometime. My gardens are still beautiful in spring." As Eleanor returned to her seat, she passed Mark, giving him a look that spoke volumes about her disappointment. Mark now sat alone at the head table, Karen having moved to check on Ethan with the nanny. He watched as person after person visited Caitlin's table, congratulating her on both her beautiful children and her business success. James Wilson approached Mark again. "Several clients are asking about Atlantic Technologies as a potential investment. They're impressed by Caitlin's leadership." "She's not that special," Mark muttered. "She just got lucky." James shook his head. "This isn't the time for bitterness, Mark. You might want to consider damage control. Several people have mentioned how you portrayed Caitlin after your divorce." As the dessert plates were cleared, Caitlin noticed the quadruplets beginning to tire. It was well past their usual bedtime. "We should think about leaving soon," she told Lucia. "But we haven't had our special moment with Mr. Johnson yet," little Mark protested sleepily. "What special moment?" Caitlin asked, confused. "When we tell him thank you for inviting us," John explained. "You said we should always say thank you to hosts." Caitlin looked across the room at Mark, who was now standing alone by the Christmas tree, drink in hand. He'd been avoiding direct contact all evening, but she knew they couldn't leave without speaking. Not if she wanted true closure. "You're right," she told her sons. "We should thank our host before we leave." Gathering her courage, Caitlin stood up. The moment she'd been preparing for had arrived. It was time to face Mark directly, to look into the eyes of the man who had once convinced her she was broken, and show him the whole, complete woman she had become. Caitlin took a deep breath and guided her 4 sleepy boys through the crowd toward Mark, who stood alone by the massive Christmas tree. His back stiffened as he saw them approach, but there was nowhere for him to escape. Nearby guests pretended not to watch while hanging on every movement. "Mark," Caitlin said calmly, stopping a few feet away, "thank you for inviting us to your beautiful home. The boys wanted to say goodnight before we leave." Mark's forced smile didn't reach his eyes. "Caitlin, what a surprise this evening turned out to be." He gestured vaguely toward the quadruplets. "You've been busy since we last met." "Yes, I have," she replied simply. An awkward silence fell between them. Mark filled it by taking another sip of his drink. "I understand congratulations are in order. Atlantic Technologies, CEO. Quite unexpected." "Life is full of unexpected turns," Caitlin said. Mark's smile grew colder. "Indeed, though I'm surprised you found time for both a career and family, especially given your issues." Several nearby guests, including Mark's mother Eleanor, had moved within earshot. Caitlin felt little Mark press against her leg, sensing the tension. "That's what I wanted to thank you for, actually," Caitlin said, her voice steady. "Thank me?" Mark looked confused. "Yes. After our divorce, I consulted with another fertility specialist, Dr. Sarah Chen. She's here tonight." Caitlin gestured toward Sarah, who stood nearby. "She was quite interested in our medical history. Apparently, the problem was never with me." Mark's face drained of color. Eleanor Johnson stepped closer, her expression changing from curiosity to shock. "That's not true," Mark said quickly, his voice low. "You're making things up." "I have the medical records," Caitlin replied quietly. "I didn't come here to embarrass you, Mark. I came for closure, and to show my boys that we don't need to hide from difficult situations." Dr. Chen chose this moment to join them. Mark, it's been a long time. I don't believe we've been formally introduced. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, reproductive endocrinologist at Massachusetts General Hospital. Mark nodded stiffly. Doctor. Your ex-wife's case was quite interesting from a medical perspective, Sarah continued professionally. It's unfortunate that her original doctors didn't run more comprehensive tests on both partners. Mark's eyes darted around, noticing more guests listening. James Wilson had joined the growing circle, along with 2 important clients. This isn't the appropriate time or place for medical discussions, Mark said sharply. I agree, Caitlin said. My boys are tired, and we should be going. I just wanted to properly thank our hosts. Little Mark tugged at his mother's dress. Mom, is Mr. Johnson mad at us? No, sweetie, Caitlin assured him. Grown-ups sometimes have complicated feelings when they haven't seen each other for a long time. Because you used to be married? Matthew asked innocently. Like you told us? Mark's expression hardened. You told them about me? Of course, Caitlin replied. They asked why they're named after gospel writers. I explained that one of them is named after you, from when we were married. Eleanor Johnson stepped forward, unable to stay silent any longer. Mark, what is this about fertility problems? You told us Caitlin couldn't have children. You told everyone that. Mark glared at his mother. Not now. Karen had appeared at the edge of the group, her face pale as she realized what was being discussed. What's happening? She asked, looking between Mark and Caitlin. Nothing, Mark snapped. Just catching up with old friends. Caitlin turned to Karen with genuine kindness. We were just saying goodbye. Your home is beautiful, and thank you for including us tonight. Something in Caitlin's tone made Karen step closer. Were you talking about fertility issues? Because Mark and I had treatments too. The doctor said I had minor issues, but Mark was fine. Her voice faltered as she saw the expressions around her. Dr. Chen cleared her throat. Mrs. Johnson, I don't normally discuss patients, but since it's already being addressed, male factor infertility is actually quite common. About 40% of infertility cases involve male factors. Male factors? Karen repeated, turning to Mark. But you said you were tested and everything was perfect. You said it was all my problem that needed fixing. Mark's face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. Caitlin obviously found someone willing to overlook her issues, or used a donor. He said the last word with contempt. Yes, I used a donor, Caitlin confirmed calmly. After discovering the truth about my own fertility, it was the right choice for me. The quadruplets, sensing tension, gathered protectively around their mother. Little Mark looked up at Mark Sr. with innocent curiosity. What's a donor? James Wilson stepped in, perhaps trying to save his friend from further embarrassment. Mark, the Hansons were asking about their portfolio. Perhaps we should join them? Mark ignored him. So you couldn't find a real man willing to father your children, he said to Caitlin, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Had to buy one from a catalog. A shocked murmur ran through the gathered guests. Eleanor gasped. Mark! That's enough. Caitlin remained calm, though her cheeks flushed slightly. My sons will grow up knowing that their worth isn't determined by biology but by character, something you might want to consider as you raise your own son. Several guests nodded in agreement. Mark looked around, suddenly aware of how many people were witnessing this exchange. The carefully crafted image he had maintained for years was crumbling in real time. You've always been jealous of my success, he accused, his voice rising. That's why you're doing this, trying to embarrass me at my own party. Dad was right about you, Jenny Thompson said, stepping forward from the crowd. You never could accept responsibility for anything. Jenny? Caitlin said softly. It's okay. But Jenny continued, addressing the gathered guests. My father, David Thompson, gave Caitlin a job when Mark left her with nothing. Now she's turned our company into one of Boston's fastest-growing tech firms. That's not jealousy, that's talent. James Wilson nodded. Atlantic Technologies' stock has doubled in the past year. Several people here have asked me about investment opportunities with them." Mark looked around at the faces of his business associates, seeing their changed perception. Clients who had trusted him with millions in investments now looked at him with thinly veiled contempt. "I think we've imposed on this lovely party long enough," Caitlin said, gathering her sons. "Boys, say goodnight to everyone." "Good night," the Quadruplets chorused. As they turned to leave, Karen stepped forward. "Wait." She looked directly at Caitlin. "Did Mark lie to you the same way he lied to me? About the fertility issues?" The room fell completely silent. Even the servers had stopped moving. Caitlin hesitated, looking at Karen's distressed face. "Yes," she said simply. "He did." Karen turned to Mark, years of built-up doubts finally confirmed. "You let me think it was all my fault that we needed treatments. You made me feel broken." "Karen, this isn't the time," Mark started. "It was always the time for your lies," Karen interrupted, "just never the time for truth." The head server chose this moment to step forward. "Dinner service is complete. Coffee and dessert will be served in the main hall." As guests began moving toward the hall, the spell of the confrontation broke. People drifted away in small groups, whispering among themselves. Mark stood alone by the Christmas tree, abandoned by both his current and former wife. Caitlin guided her sleepy boys toward the coat check. Lucia helped them into their winter jackets, while several guests came to say personal goodbyes to Caitlin. "Please call me next week," George Preston said, handing her his business card. "My investment group would like to discuss opportunities with Atlantic Technologies." "I will," Caitlin promised. Eleanor Johnson approached last, her eyes still showing shock from the revelations. "Caitlin, my dear, I am so sorry. I had no idea." "It's not your fault, Eleanor." "Would you really consider bringing the boys to visit in the spring? I meant what I said about my garden." Caitlin smiled genuinely. "They would love that." So would I. As Caitlin prepared to leave with her sons and Lucia, she glanced back once at the party. Karen was surrounded by concerned friends near the fireplace. Mark stood at the bar pouring another drink, isolated despite the crowded room. Their eyes met briefly across the distance. Caitlin felt no triumph, no satisfaction in his public humiliation. Only a sense of completion, of a circle finally closed. She turned away and guided her family out into the snowy Boston night, leaving behind the mansion and the man who had once convinced her she wasn't enough. The carefully orchestrated Christmas party continued, but everything had changed. Mark's perfect facade had shattered, revealing the truth that had been hidden for years. As Caitlin buckled her sleepy boys into their car seats, she realized she had gained something more valuable than revenge. She had reclaimed her story, her truth, and with it, her power. The headlights of Caitlin's car disappeared down the snowy driveway, leaving the Johnson mansion still glowing with light but changed in atmosphere. Inside, guests drifted awkwardly back to the main hall where servers offered coffee and desserts on silver trays. The elegant party continued, but conversations had shifted entirely to what everyone had just witnessed. Mark remained at the bar, pouring his third whiskey since Caitlin's departure. Several business associates who normally would have clustered around him now kept their distance, forming small groups where they spoke in hushed tones. Karen stood surrounded by concerned friends near the fireplace, her perfect hostess smile abandoned. Her closest friend, Stephanie Miller, held her arm supportively. "Do you want to go upstairs for a moment?" Stephanie asked quietly. Karen shook her head. "No, I need to finish hosting this party." She straightened her shoulders and smoothed her designer dress. "Even if my husband can't be bothered to help." At a nearby table, Eleanor Johnson sat with her longtime friend Patricia Williams, the senator's wife. "Did you know?" Patricia asked gently. "About Mark's deception?" Eleanor shook her head, her eyes sad. "I believed what he told us, that Caitlin couldn't have children. He let his own wife shoulder that blame for years." She twisted her napkin in her hands. Those beautiful boys could have been my grandchildren. They still could be, in a way, Patricia suggested. Caitlin seemed open to maintaining a relationship with you. Yes, Eleanor agreed. That's something, at least. The servers announced that dessert was being served in the dining room. Guests returned to their seats, though many chose different tables than before, now avoiding proximity to Mark. Karen resumed her place at the head table, leaving an empty chair between herself and her husband when he finally rejoined her. "You should say something," she whispered harshly. "People are talking." Mark scanned the room, noting the changed dynamics and whispering groups. "What exactly am I supposed to say?" "I don't know. You're the one who created this disaster," Karen replied. "But you need to salvage what you can." Mark stood, tapping his glass for attention. The room gradually quieted, all eyes turning to him with a new, critical awareness. "Friends," Mark began, his voice slightly strained. "Karen and I want to thank you for joining our celebration tonight. Christmas is a time for family and forgiveness." The words rang hollow in the silent room. Someone coughed uncomfortably. "We hope you're enjoying the evening," Mark continued, "and we look forward to sharing many more successful years with all of you." He sat down quickly, his toast falling flat. Conversation resumed, but with a subdued quality. Karen stared straight ahead, not acknowledging his effort. After dessert, several guests began making early departures, citing the weather or early morning commitments. Each time the door opened, cold air rushed in, cooling the once warm atmosphere of the party. James Wilson approached Mark at the dessert table, speaking quietly. "The Hansons are leaving. They asked me to set up a meeting with another advisor at the firm next week." Mark's face tightened. "They're my clients. I've managed their accounts for 8 years. They specifically asked for someone else," James replied, "and they're not the only ones. The Gardners are also considering a change." Before Mark could respond, Karen appeared at his side. "I need to speak with you," she said firmly. "In the kitchen. Now." In the large, professional kitchen, staff were cleaning dishes and packing leftover food. Karen led Mark to a quiet corner near the pantry. "You lied to me," she said simply. "Just like you lied to her." "Karen, this isn't the time." "When is the time, Mark? After all our guests leave thinking my husband is a liar? After Ethan is asleep and I can yell without traumatizing our son?" Her voice shook with controlled anger. "Or after I've wasted more years believing your lies?" "It wasn't a complete lie," Mark defended himself. "The doctor said I had issues, but it wasn't impossible. We still got pregnant naturally." Karen stared at him in disbelief. "Naturally? We did 3 rounds of fertility treatments. You made me take hormones that made me sick for months. You made me think it was all my fault." One of the catering staff glanced their way, then quickly looked down. "Lower your voice," Mark hissed. "I will not," Karen replied. "You humiliated Caitlin for years, now you've humiliated me. Tell me the truth for once. Did you marry me because you thought I could give you what she couldn't?" Mark's silence was answer enough. "I need to check on Ethan," Karen said, turning away. "Try not to destroy what's left of our party." Meanwhile, in the main hall, several guests were preparing to leave. Among them were Dr. George Preston and his wife Margaret, who had been friendly with Caitlin earlier. "We're thinking of heading out," George told the hostess at the door. "The party was enlightening." "Yes, quite revealing," Margaret added. "Please tell Karen thank you." Neither mentioned Mark. In another corner, Dr. Sarah Chen spoke with Eleanor Johnson. "I feel terrible," Eleanor admitted. "I believed my son completely. I even stopped sending Caitlin Christmas cards because Mark said it was too painful for her." "Don't blame yourself," Sarah advised. "Mark created a very convincing story. What matters is what you do now." "I'm going to call her tomorrow," Eleanor decided. "Those boys deserve to know well, I'm not their grandmother biologically, but I could be something to them." "I think Caitlin would welcome that," Sarah said kindly. By 10:30, the party had thinned significantly. What had been planned as a showcase until midnight was winding down 2 hours early. Karen made rounds among remaining guests, apologizing for Mark's absence. He had retreated to his office with James Wilson, ostensibly to discuss business but really to avoid further interactions. "Is everything okay?" Senator Williams asked Karen as she bid him and his wife good night. "Just holiday stress," Karen replied with a forced smile. "Thank you for coming." Patricia Williams squeezed her hand sympathetically. "Call me tomorrow, dear. Sometimes we need friends when family disappoints us." When the last guests finally departed around 11:15, Karen found Mark in his office, staring out the window with a drink in hand. The house staff moved quietly through the mansion, cleaning up the remains of the party. "Everyone's gone," Karen said from the doorway. Mark didn't turn. "Good. I'm taking Ethan to my parents' house tomorrow," she announced. "We'll stay through New Year's." This made Mark turn. "What?" "We have 3 more parties to attend next week." "Go alone," Karen replied. "I need time to think about our marriage. About whether there's anything real here at all." "You're overreacting," Mark said dismissively. "So I had some fertility issues I didn't want to discuss? That doesn't change anything between us." Karen laughed bitterly. "It changes everything. You married me because you thought I could give you a child when Caitlin couldn't? Except she could. You were the problem all along." "We have a beautiful son," Mark argued. "A perfect family." "We have a beautiful facade," Karen corrected him, "and tonight it cracked for everyone to see." She turned to leave but paused in the doorway. "By the way, 3 of your clients told me personally they're looking for new financial advisors, and the Gardners said they're considering investing in Atlantic Technologies instead. Apparently they were very impressed with Caitlin." Karen left Mark alone in his office, surrounded by the remnants of his carefully constructed image now lying in pieces around him. Across town, Caitlin tucked her 4 sleepy boys into bed. The Quadruplets shared 2 rooms, with Matthew and Mark in one, Luke and John in the other. "Did you have a nice time at the party?" she asked softly as she pulled the covers up. "The tree was pretty," Matthew murmured sleepily. "The cookies were good," added John. Little Mark looked up at his mother with serious eyes. "Was that man sad?" He looked sad. Caitlin brushed his hair back gently. "Sometimes people feel sad when they make mistakes and don't know how to fix them." "Like when I broke Luke's truck and didn't say sorry?" Mark asked. "A little like that," Caitlin agreed. "But grown-up mistakes are bigger and harder to fix." "You should tell him to say sorry," Mark suggested, yawning. "That's what you tell us." Caitlin smiled softly. "Sometimes it's not that simple, but you're right. Saying sorry is usually a good place to start." After the boys were asleep, Caitlin joined Lucia and Sarah in the living room. The Christmas tree lights twinkled in the corner, casting a warm glow. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, handing Caitlin a cup of tea. "Surprisingly, yes," Caitlin replied. "I thought I'd feel, I don't know, triumphant maybe? Or angry? But mostly I just feel calm." "You got closure," Lucia said. "That's worth more than revenge." Sarah nodded. "Mark will wake up tomorrow with a damaged reputation and a failing marriage. You'll wake up with 4 beautiful children and a thriving company. And Eleanor wants to be part of the boys' lives," Caitlin added. "I never expected that." "Will you allow it?" Lucia asked. Caitlin considered this. "Yes, I think so. She was always kind to me, even after the divorce. And the boys should know her. She's part of their story, even if not biologically." As they talked, Caitlin's phone buzzed with a text message from Jenny Thompson. "Dad wants full details tomorrow. Says he wishes he could have seen Mark's face. Also, 3 potential investors called me already. Your night was productive in more ways than one." Caitlin smiled and set down her phone. The party invitation that had once filled her with dread now sat forgotten on her dresser, its purpose fulfilled in ways Mark Johnson could never have anticipated when he sent it. The invitation that had once caused such anxiety now sat in a small memory box on Caitlin's bookshelf, a reminder of how much had changed in a single year. Outside her living room window, snow fell gently on Boston, coating the December streets in white. Inside, the sound of children's laughter filled the apartment as four four-year-old boys decorated a Christmas tree. "Mom, can I put the star on top this year?" Matthew asked, holding up a glittering gold star. "No, it's my turn," Mark protested. "Mark, you did it last Christmas." Caitlin smiled at her sons, now a year older and even more energetic. "You can both help. Lucia will lift you up together." Lucia Gonzalez, still an essential part of their family, nodded from where she was untangling a string of lights. "We can manage that. Just be careful with the ornaments, boys." The past year had brought many changes. Atlantic Technologies had expanded into a new headquarters in downtown Boston, complete with a state-of-the-art childcare facility where employees' children could play and learn. Caitlin's office overlooked Boston Harbor, a view she often paused to appreciate during busy days. Most painfully, Dr. Sarah Chen had lost her battle with cancer 6 months earlier. In her honor, Caitlin had established the Sarah Chen Foundation, supporting families struggling with fertility issues. The foundation already had helped 20 families begin their own journeys to parenthood. "Mail's here," Luke called out, bringing in a stack of envelopes from the door. "Lots of Christmas cards." Caitlin sorted through them while the boys continued decorating. Bills, advertisements, holiday cards from friends and business associates. At the bottom of the pile was a small envelope addressed in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a child's drawing, a Christmas tree with stick figures underneath labeled in an adult's neat print, "Ethan and Dad." A note was attached in the same adult handwriting. Mark wanted to send this to his namesake, Karen. "What's that, Mom?" John asked, noticing her surprised expression. "A Christmas card from a little boy named Ethan," Caitlin explained, showing them the colorful drawing. "He's 2 years old now." "Is he my friend?" little Mark asked, coming closer. Caitlin considered how to answer. "Not yet, but maybe someday. His father is the man you were named after." Mark's eyes widened. "Mr. Johnson? From the Christmas party last year?" "Yes, that's right." The boy studied the drawing with serious concentration. "Can I send him a card too? You said we should be kind even to people who make mistakes." Caitlin felt a rush of pride and something else, perhaps hope that her children would grow up wiser than their elders had been. "That's a wonderful idea," she said. "We'll make special cards tomorrow." Across town, in a modern downtown apartment building, Mark Johnson stood at his window, watching the same snowfall. His view was different now, no longer the historic charm of Beacon Hill, but the glass and steel of Boston's financial district. The past year had brought dramatic changes. 2 weeks after the Christmas party, Karen had filed for legal separation. By Valentine's Day, she had moved permanently to her parents' home in Connecticut with Ethan. "It's not just what happened at the party," she had told him. "It's that our entire marriage was built on a lie. You wanted a wife who could give you a child, not me specifically." Professionally, things had deteriorated as well. Several major clients, including 2 who had been at the party, transferred their accounts to other advisors. By summer, Mark had been quietly asked to take on a reduced role at Boston Capital Partners. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Karen. "Ethan wants to talk to you," she said without greeting. "I'm putting him on FaceTime." The screen switched to show his son's face, now a full-fledged toddler with expressive eyes and light brown hair. "Daddy!" Ethan called. "I drawed you a picture." "Drew," Karen corrected gently off-screen. "You drew Daddy a picture." "I drew you a picture," Ethan repeated. "With a Christmas tree." Mark smiled, genuine warmth replacing his usual controlled expression. "That's wonderful, buddy. Did you send it to me?" "Mommy helped me. And we sent one to the other Mark too." Mark's smile faltered. "The other Mark?" Karen's face appeared in the frame. "Caitlin's son," she explained. "Ethan saw pictures and asked about the boys with the same face. I explained they're named Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and he got very excited that one shared his daddy's name." "You're in touch with Caitlin?" Mark asked, surprised. "We've spoken a few times," Karen said. "After everything, I needed to understand what really happened. She's been very kind, all things considered." After the call ended, Mark sat at his desk thinking about how completely his life had changed since last Christmas. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Coming to Boston next week. Would like to see you. Having lunch with Caitlin and the boys on Tuesday." His mother had formed a relationship with Caitlin's sons over the past year, visiting them several times and hosting them at her Connecticut home. She had shown Mark photos of the boys playing in her garden, their identical faces bright with laughter. 3 days before Christmas, Caitlin sat in her office at Atlantic Technologies finishing year-end reports. A knock at her door revealed Jenny Thompson. "Your 4 o'clock is here," Jenny said, "and Dad called. He wants updates on the Coleman software integration when you have time." "Tell him I'll call tonight," Caitlin replied, gathering her papers. "How is he feeling?" "Much better. The new medication is working well." Jenny hesitated. "Are you sure about this meeting?" Caitlin nodded. "It's time." In the small conference room, Mark Johnson waited, looking different than he had a year ago. His designer suit remained impeccable, but his face showed new lines, and he seemed less certain of himself. "Thank you for meeting me," he said as Caitlin entered. "Your email sounded important," she replied, taking a seat across from him. Mark looked down at his hands. "I received a Christmas card yesterday. From your son Mark, with drawings from all 4 boys." Caitlin nodded. They wanted to send one after Ethan sent them his drawing. "It affected me," Mark admitted. "More than I expected. Especially the note." Little Mark had insisted on dictating a special message while Caitlin wrote it down. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Johnson. Mom says you made mistakes, but everyone deserves forgiveness if they say sorry. Do you like trucks? I love trucks." "Children see things simply," Caitlin said. "They don't hold grudges." Mark was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry, Caitlin. Not just for what happened at the party last year, but for everything before. For lying about the fertility issues. For making you believe you were the problem. For letting everyone think you were broken when it was me." The words hung in the air between them. The apology she had once needed desperately but had eventually stopped expecting. "Why now?" she asked. "Because I've lost almost everything that mattered to me," Mark said honestly. "My marriage, my reputation, half my clients. It made me realize what I did to you. I took away your reputation, your friends, your sense of self-worth. And for what? To protect my ego?" Caitlin studied his face, seeing genuine regret. "I appreciate your apology, I really do, but I'm not the person I was 5 years ago. That woman needed to hear this. I've moved beyond it." "I know," Mark said. "You've built an amazing life. Better than the one we had together." "Different," Caitlin corrected. "Just different." Mark hesitated. "There's something else. Karen and Ethan are moving back to Boston after New Year's. She's been offered a position at a downtown real estate firm." "That's good," Caitlin said. "Ethan will be closer to you." "Yes, and Karen mentioned that the boys might want to meet sometimes, play dates or something." He looked uncertain. "Would you be open to that?" Caitlin considered this. "I think that could be good for all the children. They'll likely attend the same schools eventually, move in the same circles. Better they know each other than be strangers with a complicated history between their parents." "Thank you," Mark said simply. As their meeting ended, neither felt the need for further conversation. The apology had been given and acknowledged, not forgotten but accepted as a step toward a different kind of future. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright. Caitlin woke to excited footsteps as 4 pajama-clad boys burst into her bedroom. "Santa came! Santa came!" they shouted in near unison. In the living room, presents were piled under the tree they had decorated together. Lucia arrived with fresh cinnamon rolls and hot chocolate, a Christmas tradition they had established. As the boys tore into their gifts with delighted exclamations, Caitlin sat on the couch, watching them. On the mantel stood a photo of Dr. Sarah Chen, smiling from a frame decorated by the Quadruplets. Her phone buzzed with Christmas wishes from friends and colleagues. One message stood out, from Eleanor Johnson. "Merry Christmas to you and those wonderful boys. Thank you for letting me be part of their lives." Next to it appeared a message from Mark. "Merry Christmas. Thank you for your kindness to my mother and for teaching your sons about forgiveness." Caitlin set down her phone to help John unwrap a difficult package. As she looked around at her sons' joyful faces, she felt complete. Not because of business success or social vindication, but because she had built a life of authenticity and love. The journey from that devastating divorce 5 years ago to this moment had been difficult. But watching her boys play with their new toys, hearing their laughter fill the room, Caitlin knew that every painful step had led her exactly where she was meant to be. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.